Hello and welcome to episode 246 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are previewing the fourth and final major of the 2026 Call of Duty League season. Major 4 is coming up this weekend, and it's been almost a week since we did our last show, so we'll run through quickly the final online matches of the CDL season that happened this past weekend. And, you know, we have a few other things that we might talk about, but of course, these are, the major preview shows are always pretty fun. It's a lot more loose and not as constructive or whatever. I mean, that's not the right word, but it's always off to a good start already. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, didn't do a Sunday show, so we got some matches from this past weekend to talk about, but online portion of the season is officially over. So no more online COD, at least for the CDL portion. There still might be some online stuff for challengers here and there, but at least for the pros, that's done and dusted. We got Major 4 this weekend, then we got Champs and EWC, and then it's back on to Roster Mania and a new season. So although the online portion is officially over, we're still getting into the most important and the most exciting matches of the entire season. So it's a good time to be a COD fan.
Definitely is. Do you want to run down the online matches from this weekend, and then we'll go and we can reference back to some of them as we're talking about the Major 4?
Yeah, I don't remember how long it took me last time I did this, but I'm gonna try to do it even quicker than I guess it would have been for Major 3 when we did a speed run. But anywho, we're gonna go do this as fast as possible. So Friday, June 19th, started with FaZe versus Falcons. FaZe absolutely slammed Falcons 3-0. It wasn't even close. Very much a needed performance out of FaZe heading into this week with the previous conversation we had about, would have been a good test to see how Falcons stack up against FaZe, considering the way FaZe were playing previously. FaZe put any notions of that to rest with a convincing 3-0 victory. LAT versus C9 followed that up. 3-1 win for LAT. Cloud9 won the search in typical Cloud9 fashion from this season. Levy played all right, but other than that, it was, pretty convincing for LAT. It was a 40-point win and the second hard point and 3-2 in the overload, so it wasn't necessarily a blowout compared to some of the other losses we've seen from Cloud9 this year, but end of the day, LAT win 3-1. And then final match on Friday, General Mates versus Boston. Mates win 3-1. Boston wins the S&D. General Mates wins the respawns. Once again, the last hard point was a 17-point map, so pretty close, but outside of that, it was somewhat convincing from General Mates, and it's against a team you expect them to beat, so that was a strong performance out of them. Then we start Saturday, June 20th, Miami versus Cloud9. Typical Cloud9 fashion again. Cloud9 wins the search, but they lose the 3 respawns, and Miami wins 3-1. Don't want to get, we'll talk a little bit more about Miami, but at least at this point in the weekend, it was, a case of Real playing pretty well, probably his best since he returned to the Miami roster, but at the same time, he was doing this against a Cloud9 team, so it was hard to, see how much stock you wanted to put into that, and obviously things changed, but at least at this point, Miami picked up a win to start their weekend, 3-1 against Cloud9. LAT versus Vancouver, LAT 3-0. Was a 6-5 round 11 in the S&D on Hacienda, but then it goes right into an 8-0 win in the overload, so not much to talk about there. Optic versus Toronto, pretty surprising. It was a 3-2 win for Optic that came down to Game 5, round 11. Optic were up 81-0 in the map 1 hardpoint, ended up losing that on Den, which Den hardpoint has been one of Toronto's better maps this year, but obviously that was at a time when that whole thing happened after they added Kips, and they obviously had Joe in the roster, so it's hard to put too much stock into that. But this was actually an Optic Neslo because Optic won both S&Ds and lost both hardpoints, and this is coming after a stretch where we were, I think it was last week when Optic went 0-4 in S&D. So now they won the S&Ds but lost the 2 hard points. So that's a little concerning, but end of the day, Optic were able to get a 3-2 win against Toronto. Shout out Abe for dropping 17 in the Game 5 loss, which that would have been the record, but Joe, the player he replaced, dropped 18 either last week or 2 weeks ago now. I can't remember when, but so Abe should have the second most kills in S&D on the Black Ops 7 season now. So 3-2 win for Optic there, and then final match on Saturday, Falcons versus G2. Absolute, I can't believe I let myself pick G2 twice this weekend, and I even said the last show that this was going to happen, but Falcons win 3-2. Gentlemen, G2 probably could have won, especially the game 5, but there were multiple points they, you know, especially in the game 5, they could have did a better job of closing things out, and especially round 9, it was 4-4. Have a 1v3 situation against Celium, and Celium clutches it up to swing it from a potential G2 5-4 lead to Falcons going up 5-4, and then Falcons just closed out in the following round. Skies just pretty mind-blowingly, we've seen it over the years in different situations, but he had a chance to plant the bomb and just decided to not plant, even though he was right next to the bomb, and went for the kill instead, which, Skies has been known for his S&D in the past, so I'm not going to fully fault him there, but that's just always a play that I've never agreed with, and it ended up costing G2 the shot to go to round 11 here. So Falcons get a win to close out their week and go 1-1 after losing to FaZe. So heading into the major, that's a good sign for them, obviously, as opposed to potentially going 0-2. And then Sunday, June 21st, Miami versus Vancouver. Vancouver 3-0 Miami. I think it was a 3-0 in the minor. I'm not 100% sure, but either way, we saw Vancouver beat Miami in the minor tournament in their first match with Real's return to the roster, and once again, Vancouver take care of business against Miami. So it's maybe it's just a circle now, or a triangle where Miami beats FaZe beats Vancouver, but Vancouver beats Miami. I don't really know, but even Vancouver played FaZe pretty tight the last time they played as well too. So pretty confusing there for this to happen to Miami, but we've now seen it twice in recent times, so something to keep in mind heading into the major for sure. Toronto versus G2, another trolley match out of G2. They go up 2-0 and they get reverse swept in another match where they had the ability to close out maps 3 and 4 and not let it go to a game 5 round 11. So I think I was mixing up this match with the Falcons match earlier, but G2 had multiple chances to win multiple different maps this weekend, and they weren't able to close them out. So, typical Minnesota fashion there, losing in game 5 and not taking advantage of situations where they were potentially able to take a win and build some momentum heading into the major. But for Toronto, this was all around a pretty solid week out of them, all things considered. Obviously, they didn't win against Optic, but they were able to look somewhat more competitive, and then obviously picking up a win here against G2 with questions about how they were playing in the previous week before this. This is a much better result from them in that aspect. And then finally, last match of the weekend, FaZe versus Carolina. FaZe 3-0 slam Carolina in Knox's CDL debut. Knox is now playing for Carolina in place of Standy, who he either benched himself or is just not playing due to personal reasons. So Knox made his CDL debut and didn't go too well, but that's, we always talk about when players making their CDL debut, you would rather play against the bottom teams than the teams on top of the standings, and this is the case where Knox unfortunately has to play against FaZe, and they just get 3-0 slammed. So it was a 6-5 in the S&D, but 100-point club in the map 1 and 5-2 in the overload, and FaZe go 6-0 map count on the final weekend of online action, which they are probably one of the teams that is most excited about online being done and dusted.
Yeah, that was about a little less than 8 minutes, I believe. You were Yeah, I think maybe 7 minutes and 50 seconds. Appreciate that. Let me just run through the qualifier standings after. So obviously we had 5 matches for each team in the Major 4 qualifiers. We had LAT. They were the only team to finish 5-0. They had a 15-7 map count. They finished with the first seed. Then the Falcons, despite their loss, they finished second at 4-1. Optic Texas, Paris Gentlemates, FaZe Vegas, and Boston Breach all finished 3-2. So, that's a 3rd through 6th tie. Then you had G2 Minnesota, Carolina Royal Ravens, Miami Heretics, and Toronto Koi all finished 2-3. But because of the tiebreakers, G2 and Carolina ended up with the final 2 winners bracket spots, and Miami and Toronto will start in the losers bracket. Then the Vancouver Surge, in spite of their 1 win this week, they finished 1-4, and C9 New York finished 0-5 in the qualifiers, as you might expect. I believe Richard Nicole in the YouTube chat, he said, "Hey boys, been listening to the pod since MW3. First off, just want to give a big shout out on the growth you've seen. Keep up the good work, and thank you for covering the scene. I've got one suggestion, meaning to send for a while, maybe rotate pick'ems week by week to give my boy Bink a shot at first pick sometimes. Have a great show. I'll catch the full episode tomorrow on podcast." I appreciate that, Richard. I will try to give Bink a little bit of an edge. I mean,
I will say, honestly, I make the picks before Preston because I do the notes before the episodes and I type my picks in there. So Preston could technically see who I'm picking before all these matches, but it's not that serious either. But appreciate you, Richard.
And I don't like that Richard has taken a favorite in this podcast and that it isn't mine. And then Rickus Morty in the YouTube chat, he said, "Breaking news, Browns still don't have a clue on how to win football games. Oh yeah, and they don't know who their starting quarterback is." I think, well, they've never known how to win football games, so that's not breaking news. That would be breaking news back in 1999 or something like that. But hey, it's June. I don't have to think about football at least for another few months, and very much would like not to until at least then. But yeah, we are done and dusted with online Call of Duty. Again, like you said, I'm sure FaZe in particular is very happy about it, but I'm sure most of these teams, I don't know if there's one team other than maybe Miami, but Miami has not had a good run of it the last few weeks. But other than that, most of the teams are probably pretty happy to just get it over with and move on to Major 4. And that's exactly what we're going to do at this point in the show. So, if this is, I guess, your first time tuning in to the podcast, or maybe you're not entirely familiar with the CDL, I just kind of run down. There are 12 CDL teams, 8 teams because of these qualifiers start in the winners bracket, 4 teams start in the losers bracket, and then it's a double elimination tournament throughout. That is effectively the only thing that you really need to know before you get into it. I think we should start when we're talking about this major with what I think is the pretty clear favorite. I would imagine that you think so as well, and that's the LA Thieves. They also probably have the easiest first round matchup of any of the winners bracket teams as well. They play the Carolina Royal Ravens to start off Major 4 on Friday in Paris. I think we should add. The Thieves, again, the only 5-0 team. I believe their win streak is nearing 15, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go and look, but they have not lost since the very beginning of Major 3. I think they lost to, who'd they lose to in the winners bracket of that? FaZe, was it? Yeah, so they lost to FaZe, and they have not lost since then. They ran through the losers bracket of Major 3. They've won the 2 minors this season. Again, they went undefeated in the Major 4 qualifiers. And, as of our power rankings that we updated last week, we both believed that they are the top team, even ahead of Optic, which was not necessarily the case even coming out of Major 3 and going into the Major 4 qualifiers. So talk me through, is there any chance that the Carolina Royal Ravens could put the Thieves on upset alert? And, Carolina, they have to pretty much win this tournament to make it to champs. So it would have to start here. Is there any shot for the Royal Ravens?
I don't think there is, but, stranger things have happened. It was, pretty famously, I think Boston last year beat LAT at Major 2 maybe when Boston was the 8 seed and LAT was the 1 seed. But we've seen this earlier this year. I think I mentioned it last episode. Maybe it was 2 episodes ago. Like the whole, Exceed honeymoon phase in the Major 1 qualifiers. They beat LAT online, and then they play each other in the first round on LAN at Major 1, and LAT won that. So obviously different team and multiple iterations since then. This team, assuming Knox is playing for them at this major, I don't even know if that's like confirmed or announced or anything, but assuming that's the case, like you're playing with a guy who's played 1 CDL match and they didn't even win a map in it. Obviously that was a tough match against FaZe, but then it doesn't get any easier for him going up against LAT. It's kind of reminiscent, honestly, of Dylan Rex's situation with Carolina last year, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure that both of those matches were again. It was like they played LAT online in his debut in the last week of the Major 3 qualifiers, and then they went to Major 3, and then they played LAT again, and I'm pretty sure they lost like 3-0, 3-0. So, tough way to start the CDL career for Knox, but obviously, if especially like I said, for who were we talking about? Was it talking about Vancouver or Boston? I can't remember, but Carolina, like you mentioned, most likely not going to be a champ, so this is their champs in some essence. Maybe that gives them a little extra fire, extra motivation to try and make something happen. But if LAT's playing the way they've been playing of late, I don't think it's very likely that Carolina or any team, quite frankly, is able to take them down right now.
Yeah, so Carolina is 70 points behind 8th place, which is a tie between G2 and Miami. They could get 2nd place, which will give them 75 points, but that is assuming that neither G2 or Miami, or one of them, don't win any matches or earn any points if they don't get past losers round 1, which, I mean, the way that both of those teams are playing, that is not an unrealistic scenario by any means. I could see both of those teams actually not even making it past losers round 1. However, for Carolina of all teams to make it to 2nd place, that just doesn't seem realistic. I don't think that there's really any shot at them doing that. I do think there's a shot that they beat LAT. Like you mentioned, LAT has had these moments where, despite how good they've looked online, they go to LAN and they kind of lay an egg in that first match we saw against the Boston Breach. At the end of the last season, that's kind of when things started to go off the rails a little bit, I believe, at Major 4. And then, that turned into champs, and they had a really disappointing end to that season. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case now, but I don't want to rule out a Carolina win. I'm obviously going to pick LAT like you. I think it would be foolish not to, but I think Carolina has a shot at winning this. They don't really have any shot to actually do what is required of them, and that is to get at least 2nd place at Major 4. But I mean, it's been nice that they haven't been like completely dead in the water over the past like month or so, and they made it a little more interesting. Obviously, if they had been able to win some of these close matches that they've had recently, I think that would have been a lot better, and they wouldn't have had to get 2nd. Maybe they would have had to get 3rd, 4th, but that would have made it a lot more realistic. But yeah, I believe LAT will win and beat Carolina to start Major 4. I believe the second, I guess, easiest match would probably be Optic versus the Boston Breach, although we have to mention that Boston has played really well, at least compared to what they had the rest of the season. They've been mathematically eliminated from champs contention for a while now, but this was certainly their best major qualifier performance. I think this might be the only time this season that they had made it into the winners bracket. Any shot, considering how well Optic has done in the winners bracket of these tournaments, and they have to this point not lost a single LAN match aside from the grand finals of the 3 majors. Is there any shot for Boston, however well they have played compared to at least the rest of the season, any shot for them to make an upset here and really throw a wrench in Optic's plans?
I would say that probably just about everybody before this set of online qualifiers would have given this I mean, quite frankly, most people would probably give it a 0% chance of Boston beating Optic previously. I wouldn't say that because, like I was just saying with LAT versus Carolina, like anything is possible on any given day, especially in some of these recent Call of Duty titles. I would have probably been hard pressed to go higher than 1% chance, though, for Boston to beat Optic previously. But after these last 2 weeks, I will now say maybe Boston has a 2 or 3% chance of beating Optic, which I mean, that's doubling or tripling the odds that some people would most likely give them, but I still think very, very slim chance. It's just the only very minor worry I have is we've seen Boston and it's different teams, and so it's hard to make this comparison, but historically some Optic teams have come out flat on the first day of tournaments with I think it was actually last year Barcelona, the first event of the year. They had a little bit of a slow start after traveling and whatnot, so maybe that's a thing. I don't want to make excuses or anything, but more importantly, what I was mentioning during my mini speed run of the matches with Optic losing hard points against Toronto this week, and then I believe the previous week going 0-4 in Search and Destroy. It's not like they're struggling overall. It's not like they're struggling in one particular mode, but they have shown vulnerability. And I just mean that in the sense of like, it doesn't necessarily mean, yeah, Boston's going to 3-0 choke slam them, but that just like, especially if you are in the Boston camp, like watching the VODs or anything, it's like, okay, we can do these things, whatever those things might be, to potentially steal a hard point. We can potentially do this to potentially steal a search because we've seen them in recent times lose these modes. And that's just, again, like, I don't think it's very likely at all. I don't think it's a large chance of happening, but it has to be at least slightly more possible than many people would have previously considered. End of the day, I think it's a non-story and Optic come out and take care of business, but I mean, it's definitely like one of those things where I'm talking about it more now than I thought I ever would have previously this season.
Just in general, I think that there's a good reason to not be as strong of believers in Optic for Major 4 as we have been for the first 3 majors of the season. Coming into that Toronto match this weekend, they had lost 3 consecutive matches. I don't believe that they had lost 3 straight matches. If I'm not mistaken, they'd only lost 2 consecutive matches once, and that was during the Major 1 qualifiers, and that was when they lost in mid to late January to LAT and then Carolina in back-to-back weeks of the Major 1 qualifiers. But other than that, they had not lost any consecutive matches. And then they lose in the finals of Minor 2, 4-2 to LAT, and then they lose Game 5s to G2 and then Carolina. And then they beat Toronto in Game 5. But like, we talked about it before, going to Game 5, like letting that series go there or forcing a series to go there, however you want to phrase it, that does open up the possibility of losing those series. That turns it into more or less a coin flip. And that hasn't been something that Optic has done a lot. They've dominated a lot of series. Even before they lost in the minor grand finals, they had won 4 straight 3-0s. They had beaten Vancouver, Miami, Falcons, and Paris, all sweeps. Granted, Paris was a new roster. Miami and Vancouver are not necessarily the best teams or anything, and the Falcons have been hit or miss, although I would say going into that specific match, the Falcons were kind of on a little bit of a hot streak. But like, it does show that they were able to take care of business really efficiently before the minor, and then they lose to LAT, which I think they have a losing record by quite a bit to LAT this season, and then they lose to G2. We just saw G2 lose 2 matches this week. They lost to Carolina. We just saw them lose, and then they almost lose to Toronto, and we've been talking about them the last few weeks about how we don't believe in them and we don't think that they're a very good team, and maybe we underestimated them a little bit, but I certainly don't think that they're some kind of championship contender. So those 3 matches, you would definitely expect Optic to win them. In some cases, you would expect them to dominate, and that has not been the case. So I think that there is a very valid rationale for not believing in them nearly as strongly as we have in the past. How much of that plays into just this tournament in general? I don't think that either one of us realistically thinks that Optic is going to lose to the Boston Breach in round one, but we have seen them just race through the first three majors. They have not lost any matches. They have, every time that they've gotten to the grand finals on Sunday, I think both of us are like, yeah, they're going to win. And we totally believe that, even going into that, into that series, and then they haven't. But now you talked about it. They have a vulnerability. They don't look nearly as strong. How much of that plays into just this entire tournament, and how much hesitation do you have to pick them to go all the way through the winner's bracket like they have in those first three majors?
Yeah, I'd say I wouldn't pick them to be the team to get all the way through the winner's bracket, but obviously I think the one team that I would pick above them is LAT, and I think LAT have a tougher road if you look at the bracket, and that's mainly due to the second round matchups. If Optic gets by Boston, as they should, they then play Falcons or G2, whereas LAT, if they beat Carolina, they then play Gentlemates on home turf or FaZe. And obviously, I think Gentlemates and FaZe are both better teams than Falcons or G2. So I think Optic has a much easier road to that winners final. It's just going to be a question of who they face off there. And I mean, we've seen FaZe beat LAT on LAN before, just recently at this past major. But at that same major, we also saw LAT get their revenge against FaZe. The home crowd factor. It's going to be interesting if LAT play Gentlemates, because then it's going to be the French fans for Hydra playing against the French fans for all of Gentlemates. So that would be kind of funny to just see if it happens at this tournament. But either way, that second round matchup for LAT, assuming they beat Carolina, is much tougher than the second round matchup for Boston or for Optic, assuming they get by Boston. So I do think Optic. I mean, I could see Optic realistically going 6-0 map count to the winners final. And then if they do that and they get to the winners final and it's not against LAT, I think they do have another really good chance to get to the grand finals through the winners bracket. But if it is Optic versus LAT in the winners finals, I would have to pick LAT.
I definitely agree with you on they have the easiest path, or the easier path, than LAT. Just having the chance to play, you have to play either Paris or FaZe, makes it a lot more difficult for the Thieves. Then let's go to that match where it's the Falcons and G2 who will play Optic in that second round. Of course, we both just saw. We saw both of these teams just lose. We saw them play. You have pretty much sworn off G2, so I have a feeling where you're going to go with the pick'em. But how much hesitation do you have just in general with these teams? Because the Falcons, until Major 3, had been a complete dud, have been much more disappointing, relative to the expectations than G2. And then G2, I think we both had maybe a renewed sense of hope, maybe optimism about this team post roster changes. How do you feel about them now, considering they're coming off of a 0-2 week in the qualifiers?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saw Falcons beat G2, and like I said during my speed run, G2 could have won that match, and I would have a very different tone about it. But especially throwing in G2 getting reverse swept by Toronto after potentially, however you look at it, most likely choking that match against Falcons, I am just like I'm out on G2 now. And I think that, honestly, like, I'm not going to pick G2 to win this match, and I could very easily see them winning this match now because I'm going to pick Falcons. So I think this is, especially because it was a 3-2 in this online match that we just saw, it really could go either way. And like I'm saying, like, it was 4-4 in the round, or sorry, 4-4 in the game 5, and a 1v3 swings it from a 5-4 lead for G2 versus a 5-4 lead for Falcon. So really, like, a 2-round difference overall in the series, and things could go either way on LAN. But I just think, especially due to Falcon's performance on LAN at Major 3. I feel like they get a little bit of an edge here, but really I think this is like it's one of those matches that I think is going to be very forgettable in the long run of this major. Like it's just a match of two teams that, because of the way the standings worked out, they get to play each other as opposed to playing against tougher competition and being sent down to the losers bracket right away. And I think whoever wins this match is, assuming Optic beats Boston, they will most likely struggle to take down Optic. But crazier things have happened before, especially the last we talked, and can't remember if it was last episode or not now. Maybe it was 2 episodes ago. Whenever I keep mentioning like the last event being the quote unquote champs event for these teams that don't make it, I always just think about that Seattle Surge team with Nikki D that pulled the upset off against Cold War, Atlanta FaZe, and that's one thing that like these losers bracket teams, they could. It's different because there's EWC now, but like some of these teams can go on runs like that, and we've seen stuff happen at the final major of the year that you just don't expect. And obviously Falcons and G2 are in a position to be at champs, so it's not the same. But end of the day, I don't think this is where some craziness could happen, but you never know.
Yeah, Minnesota has been they've lost 3 straight matches. LAT, Falcons, and Toronto, obviously the last 2 being this past weekend. All 3 of those losses are Game 5s, as you might expect with G2 Minnesota. Before that, they had beaten Optic in a 3-2. And then before that, they were in the minor. That was the first time that they had been with this roster, if I'm not mistaken. And they beat Boston and then lost to LAT 3-0. So, yeah, like it's been pretty rocky with this specific roster. I think it's kind of surprising, especially the Toronto one. I think you could talk yourself into the Falcons one and be like, all right, like, they kind of choked, but Falcons are better. We talked about it. They're maybe like the 5th best team in the CDL, and G2 is kind of around there. So it's kind of a coin flip series as it stands. But them losing that series and losing Toronto, it's impossible to feel good about picking them, and I'm not going to pick them. Obviously, I don't think that that's a good thing. I don't think that they've deserved it by any means. If you're just looking at the season in totality, if you're looking at this specific roster and what they've done in the last few weeks together, they just don't deserve to be picked right now, especially when you compare them to Falcons, who, of course, they got stomped by FaZe, and maybe that's concerning considering they beat FaZe at Major 3, and however you want to kind of swing it. But at this point, like the losses that the Falcons have in the past month plus are to FaZe, Optic, LAT. That's it. Those are their losses. They've lost 4 matches, 2 of them to Optic, 1 to LAT, 1 of them to FaZe. Otherwise, they beat Carolina, Minnesota, Paris, Miami, and they've all obviously beaten FaZe and C9. So I feel very comfortable, at least compared to G2, picking the Falcons, and I'm going to go with the Falcons. But I don't want to say like this is definitive by any means, because neither of these teams have been consistent enough to be incredibly confident about them. Like we can talk about LAT and talk about Optic and whatever struggles that they may have had at some point in the season, or Optic currently, but the confidence for them to win those matches is 90% plus, or 95%. Like that, it's an almost certainty that they'll win those, and we feel very confident in that. And it's a shock if they don't. If the Falcons get 3-0'd by G2, it'll be surprising, but not nearly as surprising if Optic loses any kind of series to the Boston Breach. And so I'll go with Falcons. I feel fairly confident, but not nearly as confident as you possibly could, just because both these teams need to prove it. And I think for the Falcons especially, because I just don't have any belief that G2 is going to be able to make some kind of run at champs. But I think with the Falcons, if they can make another run, something like what they did at Major 3, and I remind people that they, I believe, lost to Optic and LAT in that tournament, and like that's it. They lost an Optic in the winners bracket, they lost to LAT in the losers bracket, the 2 grand finalists. And I think that you can make a case that they were the third, or I think the third, but maybe the fourth best team at that major, and their placing just doesn't look like that because of the teams that they had to play. But if they can make a third or fourth place run at Major 4, we're having a whole different kind of conversation about the Falcons come champs preview and talking about like their potential to actually win that tournament in, I believe it is mid to late July. I don't, it's in like 3 or 4 weeks, but I have a lot of faith that if they do that, then we will have a pretty lengthy conversation about the Riyadh Falcons. On the other side of the bracket, that I think that's where it's a little more interesting, because I think we know that LAT is going to beat Carolina. That's certainly our pick. But there's the Paris Gentlemen versus FaZe Vegas in the other top side bracket match. And I have absolutely no idea where to go with either one of these teams. FaZe, like you said earlier, 6-0. This is probably the best that they've looked online in a really long time. They've been honestly really bad, at least compared to what we know FaZe to be generally, and even this season, they had been really bad recently. They struggled a little bit at Major 3, especially in that first part of the group play. And I think there's reasons to be a little skeptical of FaZe going into Major 4. On the other hand, Paris hasn't been some kind of hallmark of consistency either. They have a relatively new roster with Joe and Estrio on this team, and they haven't really shown exactly what they could be capable of. They've only been together for like a month or so. I'm going to go with FaZe because FaZe have been, like, overall this season, have been a very good LAN team. Paris, we have not seen that since Major 1. Of course, they did win the first Major, and, you could talk yourself into them kind of having a resurgence with this new roster, but I think I'm going to have to see that before I can really pick them, and I think them going to the losers bracket, I certainly could see them making a big run in the losers bracket, but playing FaZe first round seems like a pretty tall task for Paris. How do you feel about this match between Gentlemen and FaZe?
Yeah, this is definitely the hands down the first round match I'm most excited for, and I think for a multitude of reasons. I think obviously just to get back to the overall outlook on this tournament as a whole, this is being Major 4 in Paris, hosted by the Gentlemates, is being advertised and branded as one of the biggest Call of Duty events of all time. From a fan perspective, like everything that we've heard, it's supposed to be like one of the biggest venues, and not only venues, because obviously there have been like more prestigious places tournaments have been hosted and whatever, but there are large expectations on this tournament, and I don't know what it's like, what type of factor the crowd is going to play for this Gentlemates team. And obviously, Rickus Morty made a comment earlier about like the green wall being international and well-traveled and stuff. It will be interesting if Gentlemates plays Optic. I will be definitely interested to see the crowd reaction to that and how that is handled. But at least in terms of this match, like I'm super excited, and I think it is in part because it's the Gentlemates hosting this event. It's Joe's first event with this new team on home turf. Like, there are a lot of reasons to be excited about this match. And then you get into the fact that these teams did just play online, and despite FaZe's struggles or whatever you want to say about how they've played online, FaZe beat them 3-2. It was a very close series, and I even put it in the notes for that week of the episode. Like, Gentlemates could have won all 5 maps against FaZe, and it came down to a game 5 round 11. So I was kind of torn in terms of what I wanted to go with here for the pick'em. I am going to go with FaZe. I still just think FaZe is the better team right now, and they did just beat them. I think, though, that the X factor being that crowd and everything, like if Gentlemates wins map 1, the crowd gets behind them. I think that's a very scary situation for FaZe to be in. Obviously, like Simp and Draza are no stranger to playing against a crowd that is rooting against them. So, I'm not really worried about it from that perspective, but it's just an unknown quantity heading into this event because I think it is a lot of the outside noise of like the expectations being placed around this event and what the crowd is going to bring and all that. But until I see it, I can't really know how much stock to put into the value that could bring to this Gentlemates team. Um, so I think this should be the best match of the first round, hands down. It's the one I'm most excited to see. I do think FaZe will get the job done, and especially like it was a very close series when they just played online. It was also at a time where this, Gentlemates squad was a new squad, limited practice, potentially no practice with like the blacklist for a week or whatever the case may be. And FaZe were able to win at a time where they haven't been playing a ton of great Call of Duty online outside of this past week. So my rationale is like FaZe beating them online when they weren't playing at their best. They've been better on LAN. I think that cancels out with the potential X factor of the crowd, and then I just think FaZe is the better team right now, and I give it to FaZe.
Yeah, I think just for all the reasons you laid out, that there's no reason to believe in Paris. I think to the extent that we have to pick them over FaZe until it's kind of like they have to win this match for me to be like, oh yeah, like all right, like I can see them beating LAT, I can see them beating Optic, but when it's been months and months of just complete and like abject failures on LAN. I think they've gotten like two top sixes at Major 2 and Major 3, and FaZe has been like consistently like a championship Sunday kind of team, and obviously won more recently on LAN than Paris has. I have to go with FaZe, but yeah, I think that there's definitely an argument for the fan element of it, and I don't know what the setup's going to be. Like, I hope that it's not like the setup that we've seen obviously this season, where it's like, all right, you have your main stage and then you have your side stage and all of that. Like, I hope we get like a pit kind of thing that we had at Champs. What was that, 2 years ago now? I don't think it was it last year, where it was like they were in the center of the arena and everybody was around them
facing each other. That was last year, I think.
Yeah, so I prefer that. I think that's the better atmosphere, and certainly would put, I think, more pressure on FaZe, but it also probably put a little bit of pressure on Paris to perform and make sure that those people go home happy. But yeah, I don't typically take into account like or flip my pick specifically because of the fans, and I think that FaZe will be able to come out with a win. Granted, we should say, like, if Simp, he has not played that great since this meta change. At least, when we're looking at what he had done in the Major 1 qualifiers, leading the league in KD, and how he was really carrying as FaZe was kind of figuring things out with this new roster. That's really not been the case recently. But I hope that he's able to have a good tournament, but if he doesn't, then I've said it before, like they don't really have a shot at like winning tournaments and certainly winning big matches if he's not playing at least like decently well. It's just almost impossible for this FaZe team without Salam, without Abizi, to come in and win a tournament or to win matches against a team the caliber of the Paris Gentlemates.
I'll push back on that a little bit, just in the sense of like it's easier to say that, in past iterations of FaZe where Simp might have like, not had his best showing, you had Abizi and Celium to pick up the slack. What the way I would view it is just we haven't seen Abuza and 04 play to, well, even that's not accurate because obviously 04 had his MVP run at Major 2, but point being, I think we've seen previous examples of the supporting cast around Simp on the previous iterations step up when they needed to, and I'm not going to say we haven't seen that from this current FaZe roster, but they haven't had to do that yet in my eyes. I don't know. Even as I'm saying this, I realize I'm not saying it the way I'm correct or trying to convey it, but it's like, Selly and Abizi are two of the best Call of Duty players of all time, and Abuza and 04 could maybe get there one day, but they quite frankly, they're just not there right now because they're so early into their careers. But, you know, obviously that is the end goal for them, and has to be part of the equation when, you know, FaZe decided to pick those guys up. So I just think, you know, it is, if Simp comes out and plays the way Simp we know he can play, then it doesn't have to be a conversation. But if he doesn't, then we'll revisit.
Yeah, the way I look at it is how I've explained Optic this season, and that's that any one of those four guys can have a bad map and it can be papered over by the rest of their team because they how talented they are. And I just don't think FaZe is like that. Of course, if 04 has like the tournament he did at Major 2, then yeah, like that could be an option, because I think that especially Booza and Draza have proven, at least at different points in their careers, and in this season at different points as well, that they can take the lead in some of these cases. But, you know, I think it's pretty clear just based on like how little that we thought of this team relative to past FaZe iterations, that like we did not expect them to be like an overly talented team where they can basically do whatever they want, however they want, and it just didn't actually matter. Whereas Optic just has all of this talent, and LAT, to a lesser extent, I would say that Optic is certainly more talented, at least like overall. But LAT also has a little bit of that, where, you know, if you have Hydra and Scrap on your team, I think like that's a pretty dominant duo to have no matter what. I just don't think that is necessarily the case for FaZe, and they do need like a full team effort to actually win these matches. But maybe they could win this match in particular against Paris without Simp playing his best. It's going to be really, really difficult though, because if Simp isn't playing his best, that probably means that Joe is doing pretty well. And if Joe's dropping numbers, like, you know, we've seen Toronto and Paris lose despite that, but like, I think in general, it tends to work out for his team if he's able to kind of dominate the opposing SMG. So we'll see. I think this is definitely the most interesting match of winners round 1. G2 and Falcons are interesting for a different reason, not necessarily for all the good reasons, but I think that we could see a potential Major 4 champion in this match between Paris and FaZe. We just don't know if either one of these teams is kind of show up the same team that they have in past majors or in past online matches especially, but I'm very much looking forward to that match. All of these matches, the winners bracket matches, are on Friday. And again, this is Paris, so the schedule is going to be a bit different than some of the past tournaments. According to the at COD League on Twitter, the first matches will start at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that'll be there'll be an alpha and a bravo. The matches that start on 8 a.m. on Friday is Optic versus Boston and G2 versus Falcons, and then around 9:45 Eastern Time will be Paris versus FaZe on Alpha and LAT versus Carolina on Bravo, and then we'll have some elimination round matches, losers bracket round 1 matches, and at least one losers bracket round 2 match that will be to close out on Friday. Let's talk about just in general, because we know the teams that honestly probably do not have a good shot at winning this tournament. And that's anybody in the losers bracket. That's the Boston Breach, probably G2, a little bit, Carolina. Who, we've talked about it before. Like, is there a dark horse? Because, at least early in the season, you can kind of convince yourself. You don't know a lot about these teams. You don't know how they'll play in these tournaments and different rosters and all of that. Now we've seen an entire regular season of online matches. We've seen 3 majors. We've seen 2 minors. There was a Pro-Am, a part of that 3rd major. We've seen a lot of Call of Duty. Is there any team outside of like FaZe, LAT, Optic, Paris? Is there any team that like really has a shot? Like, is there a chance that Falcons, G2, any of those teams actually win this tournament?
No. I think I was going to say if you were going to leave Gentlemates out, that they could potentially be a dark horse just in the sense of it being the event in Paris and the fans and the crowd and all that. But I don't consider them an actual dark horse. I do think like if you're getting super technical about what a dark horse is and everything like that, the only realistic option would be Falcon slash G2, like whoever wins that match, or I guess, whoever loses it could go on a loser's bracket run. But tying that in as well, I do think that's the most interesting match from the losers bracket perspective, because they would play Toronto, and we just saw Toronto reverse sweep G2. Obviously, Toronto haven't looked as strong of late after losing their best player. Makes sense, but I do think because of that Falcons G2 match being the most wishy-washy, for lack of a better word, wishy-washy match there in the top bracket, they drop down and play Toronto. I could see that being the spot where a loser bracket team, wins a matchup and then goes on a little bit of a run, because then, in theory, Toronto would then be able to play Boston or Vancouver, and I think Toronto, even though they haven't looked great, I think they are a better team than both of them. So then you're looking at Toronto making a top 6 run. I think maybe that's only top 8. I think that would be 6. But either way, winning 2 matches in the loser bracket, that's you get over that first hurdle, and then anything can happen after that. So I do think Toronto is the one team there. Obviously, I'm not banking on Cloud9 to do anything much in the losers bracket. Miami versus Carolina at the top there, that. I guess that match could go either way depending on what version of Miami shows up, but I don't think anything happens beyond that. So I guess you could maybe say Toronto is a dark horse candidate. I do not. I mean, that would be absolutely insane. Could you imagine Toronto somehow won this tournament after all the shit talking people have done about dropping Joe and everything like that? But I do think the road is there for them to have a better than last place finish, and obviously Toronto could just lose first match and then this is a non-conversation, but I guess I would put them at third in my dark horse rankings. I would do whatever order you want to do for Falcons G2, do them 1, 2, and then I would say Toronto third after that.
I think Falcons are kind of far and away the top dark horse or whatever, non-top 4 team at actually winning this. I've come off of my position that I had I think maybe as recently as last week or 2 weeks ago because of these matches that we just saw online, but I had said I thought any of the top 8 teams had a shot at winning the at champs. I don't believe that anymore. I think that
when did you say that? I don't remember you saying that.
I think it was. I think when we did the last, or not the most recent, but the second most recent power rankings update, I think that I had said basically those bottom 4 teams don't have any shot, obviously, Carolina regardless of actually, but then I was you could I think the way that I phrased it was you can convince me. I don't necessarily think that it's completely wide open, but I said you can convince me that G2, for example, could win champs. And I think this might have been after their roster change, I'm not entirely sure, but either way, I thought because we had seen Optic have these struggles in the grand finals, okay, despite how well they've played, we know that they could seem a little bit vulnerable when they actually get there. LAT, I'm before they have gone on and continued this entire winning streak, I think you could say, okay, especially when we were talking about do we even think that LAT is better than Optic coming out of Major 3, I think you could then convince yourself, okay, maybe somebody could beat them. FaZe, I think it's very easy to understand why we might think that, because they've lost to Miami 4 times this season, and they have certainly not been as consistent. Paris, understandable, so on and so forth. The further down that you went, especially even Toronto before the roster change, I was I definitely don't think of them as an actual championship contender in the general sense, but if Insight has his best tournament, then yeah, they probably could win something. Now I just don't believe in G2. I thought, okay, like after this roster change, I was like, I'll give them a little bit of grace. I think that maybe this is kind of like something to turn them around, at least as part of like this mediocre pack. Falcons are different though. Toronto's obviously out of the equation. That's like when you said, could you imagine them winning? And it's like, no, I literally could not imagine those 4 players winning a tournament together at any point in the near future. But I definitely think that Falcons have a shot. The fact that they have been like, I think just a step below those top teams currently, and I would even say like they're right there with the Gentlemates at least to this point. But again, like I said earlier in the show, the last 2 months, and this is like the last time that they lost to somebody that wasn't FaZe, Optic, LAT, I believe, was April 18th. And that was to the Toronto Koi in the major, like the very first Major 3 qualifier match. Since then, they've lost, I want to say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 matches, and I think they've won like 12 or something like that. But in that time, they've beaten some pretty good teams. They've beaten Paris multiple times. They've beaten FaZe. They've lost a Game 5 to Optic. They lost a Game 5 to LAT, if I'm not mistaken. But, they lost LAT, as everybody has basically in the past few months. So that's where I'm coming from there. I think that they're probably the 5th best team, and it's going to be hard to actually make it. But as we said earlier, they are on what I would consider the better side of the bracket. Like, I would rather be in the Falcons or G2's shoes, even though they have to play Optic in round 2, given that Optic wins. I'd rather be in that than have to play either FaZe or Paris and then play LAT in round 2, or be the Carolina Royal Ravens and have to be LAT in round 1 and then be either Paris or FaZe in round 2. I'd rather be on the other side of the bracket. That being said, I don't think it really matters at the end of the day. I think that I think the Falcons will beat G2 in round 1, then lose the Optic in round 2, and then they could make a decent sized run when they get in the losers bracket. I think they would drop down and play like, I always forget how it goes. I believe everybody drops down to where they are in the bracket, in the losers bracket. So like Optic would drop down and play Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken. But then in round 2, it flips. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe like if you lose in round 2, if you're in the top side of the bracket, you drop down to the bottom side. So in this case, the Falcons would drop down and most likely would play the Boston Breach or play Toronto. They would play like a pretty, I would say, suspect team, all things considered. So I don't know. I that's where I'm coming from. Again, I don't think it'll happen because we have like 4 pretty good teams and I think a few great teams in that group. And Falcons probably won't make it, but I thought we could at least, Rick Sporty said, Preston is so disrespectful to Optic. I mean, I literally think that they're probably going to get to the grand finals, and I think that they have a shot to actually, like a very good shot to win this. If Falcons get double first rounded by G2 and Toronto, like, then hands up, I will admit that I'm wrong, but that would be pretty horrific, a horrific way to end the regular season for the Riyadh Falcons.
And they wouldn't do it, but if they did get top 12, like they got to blow the roster up immediately. And obviously, I don't think they would do that right before champs, but maybe before EWC, they would make a big move. I think if a Falcons top 12 finish, like they would have to do like I couldn't imagine being in the room of anybody in like management or whatever trying to justify Celium's salary with a top 12 placing.
Yeah, well, I mean, you probably can't justify it now despite however well they've done over the past 2 months, because when you're getting paid the most in the league, reportedly, like, you probably expect to be in championships and grand finals and everything, and they haven't even really sniffed one, like, other than Major 3 when that was like their best performance, and I still think they got like top 6. So it has not been a very good return on investment so far, but if they perform well at Major 4 and or champs, and or EWC, I don't know how much they weigh that, especially if it's not actually in Saudi Arabia this year, but we'll see. Again, I don't think it'll happen, but I thought at least would mention it. out of the top four, though, we think that there is a top four. It was kind of clear in our power rankings too. LAT, Paris, FaZe, Optic, however you want to jumble those teams up. I think we both feel a little bit better about FaZe. You obviously don't think nearly as highly and take into account the online matches nearly as much. So like their online struggles don't mean as much, and therefore the online successes don't mean as much either. But how do you feel about those four teams? Who out of those four do you see coming out and actually winning Major 4 in Paris this weekend?
It's got to be LAT at this point. Like the way they've been playing of late, obviously you can think what you want about Optic, and I think Optic is the second most likely team to win this tournament, despite their recent quote unquote struggles online over the past 2 weeks. But I just think LAT are on fire right now. They have been vulnerable at times at different points of this season, though. So it's not like, it's not like a previous case where you're looking at a team that's like coming into a tournament on fire and they just haven't lost on LAN or anything like that. It's like, this LAT team, they did lose in the first round of the winners bracket last event. They just went on a nasty losers bracket run to claim the title. It would probably be to solidify how strong of a team they are. We've seen them win a tournament through the losers bracket, seeing them do it through the winners bracket. I think that would kind of cement them as the undisputed best team in the game. I do think if it is LAT versus Optic in the grand finals, even if LAT win again, I do think there would be people who would still argue that Optic are the best team because they made it to all four grand finals. But I think it would be tough to make that argument when it would be, if it was a case where it's LAT with 2 championships and Optic with none but 4 grand finals appearances. If Optic win this event and then we have another season where it's just 1 major championship for 4 different teams, then I think that conversation gets a lot more interesting. But yeah, I guess I would rank them like LAT 1 in terms of most likely to win, Optic 2, FaZe 3, Gentlemates 4. That 3-4 though, very loose there. Like I think I'm very confident in LAT at 1. I think Optic, despite the recent performances, I still think number 2. Then I think it is a little bit of a gap between 2 and 3, and I think 3 and 4 between FaZe and Mates could go either way, especially with that X factor of the crowd and how whether that actually gets the Gentlemates players going or anything like that. But I still I've been vocal over the years. I don't like when we pick the same thing for like tournament winners and stuff because I think it's boring. But I think this is one of those tournaments where it's like it feels very clear cut that this is LAT's tournament to lose.
It's funny you would say that, because I believe that, like Rickus Morty's said in the YouTube chat, he said, isn't this the classic Optic wins major? No one has them as the favorites going in. And I think despite LAT's long win streak, I think despite Optic's relative struggles, them losing 3 consecutive matches is struggles for them, and them going to 3 straight game 5s going into this tournament, I'm going to go with Optic. I think I think it really comes down to Optic has been kind of unassailable on LAN until the grand finals. And like I said, I don't know how recently I said this, but I remember coming out of the Major 3 saying something to the effect of like, it doesn't matter necessarily what happens in the grand finals as far as like my confidence. It's that in every other instance, in every other match, they seem to be like clear and very far and away the best team in the league. Despite them losing these grand finals, like I still believe that. I still think like, okay, like everybody kind of goes through a little bit of a rough patch, and that I guess that is what happened here the last few weeks. Certainly like losing those 2 matches in one weekend was not ideal and not something that gave me a lot of confidence. But there's something about LAT and I think like it might come back to me and come back to bite me especially when we talk about after Major 4 or after champs. But there's something about LAT that like is off for me, like that I don't fully believe in, that I don't fully buy into. And I do believe in Optic. I do buy into that, and I think that they are still the best team. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll actually win, right? Like, we've seen them lose to 3 teams, or I guess 2 teams, if we're talking about Paris and FaZe earlier this season, who then like kind of went into a downturn a little bit afterward. And LAT has not, of course, done that because they haven't lost since then. And I think that they'll probably get to the winners bracket finals to play Optic. And I think that'll be interesting to see that come to pass, because that'll be the first time probably all season that Optic wouldn't be the favorite in a match on LAN. So I think that'll be something to watch out for, but I will go with Optic. I think that might be, I don't know if that's my brain or my heart or my stomach. I don't know which one's actually going to, that's picking Optic there, but I am going to go with Optic, and I think they'll probably beat LAT in the grand finals. Waleed Muhammad, he said in the YouTube chat, not gonna lie, I have a weird feeling about mates. Either they crash and burn, or they dominate, don't have a good read on them yet. And I think that's both of our feelings about it too.
I think that's fair, because it is, like, it's a new team, and it's not only a new team, like they've had, I'm pretty sure, counting the minor, it would be 2.5 weeks of them actually being a team, 3 weeks at most. Potentially one of those weeks they were just not able to scrim against pro teams. So even if we just say, like, at most they have 3 weeks of practice together, potentially only 2 weeks of practice together against the top teams in the league. So I think the potential for this Gentlemates team is very high. They still are an unknown quantity because we just haven't seen enough of them yet. And I do think they have the potential to be a good team at some of the biggest tournaments of the year. And that is one thing we always talk about on this show, is like, you want to be playing your best COD at these biggest towards the end of the year, because that's when the biggest tournaments are. But I do think Gentlemates could be an X factor. I think it would be pretty disappointing if they like crash and burned at this event, just given like, how much they're seemingly investing in getting Joe Deceives to try and put on a good show for their home crowd at this extravagant event that we're hearing so much about. I would be disappointed if that happened. I could see it happening, but I don't think it's super likely, but it could happen, and I think that would be disappointing. But in terms of the LAT Optic stuff for you, I do think Optic winning this event is by far the best from a narrative perspective. Like I was alluding to, it would be those 4 top teams all winning one tournament. That would make like the awards at the end of the year, the voting on that would be a little more interesting if it was spread out, as opposed to like LAT or Mates or FaZe winning 2 championships. That would heavily swing the awards in the favor of that team that has 2 majors, as opposed to some players only having 1, or then obviously having none. So I do think from a narrative perspective, Optic winning this event is very interesting. I think LAT are on a different level right now, but that's the beauty of Call of Duty. We can sit here and talk about it, but it doesn't really matter until those 8 guys get on the server and are playing against one another.
Yeah, and like you said, if LAT wins, it becomes like what we've seen in the past. Where a team will win. Like, I think LAT finished strong when they won champs, like they won the last major and all of that. But there were times certainly when you win that last major and they have all the momentum, they have all the hype going toward them going into champs, and they're felt like the clear favorite at champs. If Optic win, of course, Optic will be considered the favorite. But I think you could talk yourself into a little bit more than if LAT win. Like, okay, like Optic can win, LAT can win, despite or depending on what happens with FaZe and Gentlemates. How did they do? And then you could really talk yourself into like a 4-team race going into champs, which would be very interesting. I mean, half the field would at least have like a good shot at winning it, and that's not something that we usually see. We usually see maybe 2, maybe 3 teams at most, but we just don't have like a clear favorite at this point if LAT doesn't win this tournament. So I think I missed something in the YouTube chat.
Oh, we good conversation brought up. I know I put it in the notes at one point. I think it was Clayster tweeting about it at the time, talking about like Zins being banned in France or whatever. And at the time, I put in the notes thinking like Neptune might be screwed, but obviously Neptune isn't playing at this event. But now Waleed Mohammed and Rickus Morty are talking about whether weed or vaping is allowed, and the impact that could have on Ghosty and Merc and potentially other players. Very funny conversation to see in the chat, but I do think there is some validity to it.
Yeah. According to leafwell.com, cannabis is fully illegal, but widely available in France. Areas like Paris feature many places, including coffee shops, where cannabis is sold. Yeah, I think so. There you go. Like, you'll have I just don't understand that aspect of it. Is it just like a nerves thing? Like, why would you smoke weed before you play? Like, to me,
I mean, that's a long running joke with Ghosty, that Ghosty's always fried when he's playing. I think there are some instances where he does, and I think there are other matches where he's sober, but
the nicotine thing does that could be a factor. But if you really need your nicotine, like, France has its cigarettes, so you can smoke if you really need to, and it's not the same as Zin. But I mean, like, I've gone to plenty of COD events, I'm sure you have too, and like there's like 20 COD players at any point in time outside smoking. I don't know if that's the same, but like vaping, smoking, like there's something that they can do after those matches. I mean, I remember like Karma walking off stage, like still in the arena and just like vaping, like very incessantly. So and granted, that was a while ago, but I think it's probably the same as it is right now.
I mean, some of the like older events, if you were in the media room, it was like you would wait to interview players, and it would be like, they're on a smoke break right now, and we got to give them 10 minutes, and then they'll come in here, and you're like, yeah, okay.
Shout out Spacely. I interviewed him while he was smoking. So, yeah, I don't know if that'll play a factor. If I don't know, the Genomates crash and burn, maybe we'll be talking about like it's some kind of controversy, and maybe they'll do well at Champs, which is in Vegas. And I mean, you could do literally anything in Vegas, so I don't think there'll be any restrictions there. But we'll have to wait and see. So you're going with LAT, I'm going with Optic. Who are you going for major finals MVP for LAT?
I'll go with Hydra because it's in France.
I will go, if Optic is going to do well, I'd probably go with Dashy. I mean, he had a very good Major 3 Grand Finals. Unfortunately, they came up short, but he had some pretty great moments. I could see it being Mercules, but I'll go with Dashy. I think if like Mercules has like, like he's had some not so great Grand Finals recently. So I think there could be a narrative right there. Like if he has like a pretty decent Grand Finals performance and Optic win, they might give it to him because of that. But I'll go with Dashy just in general.
I think they're, a little bit off topic in terms of the major overall, but I didn't put it in the notes, but I definitely saw something. It was either on the flank or maybe it was the Breaking Point podcast. I don't remember, but there's some people talking about like I think it might have been the Codcast actually with Ben J and Nameless. I can't remember, but it was some people talking about, is Merc getting too complacent after like bursting onto the scene and winning the biggest events right away at the very start of his career? And I definitely don't agree with that. Obviously, I don't know Merc like personally or anything like that, so I can't like say like attitude wise, I think that's totally impossible. But that just like, it doesn't seem like that would make a ton of sense to me. But I mean, in some fashion, I could like be convinced that it's at least partially a reason why. Like he's never had to play a full season of online matches in the CDL. And maybe it was just like not complacency or anything like that, or, just like a lack of motivation could be a factor. I don't know. But I mean, it's tough to see that when, especially with how, how he just burst onto the scene and won Champs, won EWC. He did like, did things that some players go their entire career without even having the opportunity to achieve. And he just did it right away within the first few months of him being a CDL pro. So I thought it was at least an interesting point to bring up. I don't know how much stock I really put into it or anything like that, but I did see it, and it got me thinking.
Yeah, I have a hard time getting to that place with any player because it's like, unless I personally know them or I, have heard more things than just like somebody kind of questioning their work ethic, I think it's really hard to just say like, hey, they don't work hard, they don't want it bad enough, because we see that in traditional sports all the time. And I think it's a lot of times a projection of like the fan or the analyst of like, if I was in the situation, like if you just lose, how upset are you? Are you not upset enough about, are you not upset about this loss? Like, how are you smiling? How are you laughing after a loss? You see stuff like that. And to me, like, if someone isn't outwardly emotional, I think that it just doesn't really matter. People react to losses and wins differently, and I don't think it means anything regardless. Mercules is one of the best Call of Duty players in the league. I don't think anybody is really debating that fact. Has he underperformed in major grand finals? Sure. At least compared to what we've know him to do in general. But I think to say that he is complacent, you have to really know him. And I'm not saying, Rickus Morty said, Nameless said that. I think maybe Nameless knows, maybe he doesn't. Like, maybe he's just kind of talking to talk, because that's kind of like what the job of an analyst or being on these podcasts is like a lot of these guys, like they might, be like 2 or 3 degrees removed from this person, and they decide, hey, like I'm gonna say something kind of controversial. I mean, Aches is kind of the king of this, and Aches just says stuff just to say stuff. But I think unless you know this person or specifically that he's not working hard enough, I think that's really irresponsible to kind of accuse someone of that, especially like a player as good as him. I think that it's really difficult to get to that point and to actually say, if they just worked a little bit harder, if they wanted it a little bit more, considering he literally took this team, this Optic team, from like nothing last year when he joined the team. They were maybe not even going to make champs, and then they actually win champs. I think that's a pretty hard thing. Like, maybe he's just like, he's done. Like at 19, he's like, I quit. Like, I don't need to work hard for the rest of my life, which, fair play to him. Like, I wish I could have done that at 19 as well. I could just be like, all right, whatever. Like, it's over from here. But I don't know. Like, it's a weird statement to make, just in general. But I mean, if he has another bad or like lackluster grand finals, it's going to be a lot more conversation about that. It's going to be a lot more talking about like, is Mercules really the guy? Is he going to be able to be like, take this team to the next level? Are they going to be able to win champs? Are they going to have to make a roster change after champs? I know that was a conversation we had a few weeks ago about Optic in general, but I think that'll really pop up, especially if he does not perform up to standard at Major 4 and or champs. Anything else to talk about the Major? Again, remind people that this is going to start around 8 a.m. Eastern time, starting off in Paris. Again, there will be an Alpha stream and a Bravo stream. Optic will have the first match on the Alpha stream, and G2 versus Falcons will have the first match on the Bravo stream. And then, we'll have Saturday and Sunday, and we'll be back on Sunday evening. It could be Sunday afternoon, depending on how long those matches take on Sunday. But any last thoughts on the Major before we head out here?
No, I don't think anything on the Major, to be honest. I think we hit everything we needed to. It should be a very entertaining tournament. It's a lot of expectations like we highlighted, and I think at the end of it, we're going to have a lot to talk about from a narrative perspective, regardless of who wins. So I'm excited to get the ball rolling.
And pick them for this season. So we are done with the online portion. We only have these last 2 tournaments to go, but we are separated by 1 match in total. You went 7-3 in the final week of the Major qualifiers. So you're 174 and 84. I went 8-2 in the week 3 qualifiers. So I'm 173 and 85, and Trimmer is still winless. I don't think he's going to be able to catch up to him. He's in a real Carolina Royal Ravens situation at this point in the year. we will be back on Sunday to discuss Major 4 and to wrap up the CDL regular season. It has been a long time coming. It has been, more than 6 months now, 7 months since we really started this season. So, it's been a really long time. Looking forward to talking about Major 4. I think it's going to be a very exciting event. People are going to be talking about European COD fans again, so Bink will not be happy this weekend, but maybe we'll say how great Paris was or how bad Paris was compared to North American fans. But either way, it'll be a good tournament.
It will be able to compare EU that's not what I want to say. London British fans to Paris fans. That's what we'll be able to compare.
Yeah, and we'll have another Paris event in just a month or month and a half. So we'll have at least some good talking points to discuss on Sunday. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening and watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. You can watch the VODs as well as the live streams of the podcast on YouTube. And you also follow and subscribe on twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. That's exactly where you can watch, I think, a few VODs. I think it's like up to 2 weeks or whatever, but you can also watch the live streams at Twitch. You can also follow and subscribe to Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast Twitter at Ego Chall Podcast. And again, the plan is to be back on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, at some point on Sunday after the matches are done, after Major 4 is completed. We will be back to discuss the tournament, to break it all down, to give our honest, sometimes enthusiastic, sometimes unenthusiastic thoughts on the tournament as a whole. And I think we'll have quite a bit to talk about regardless of the results. Like you just said a little bit ago, if Optic wins, then we've had 4 different major champions. If LIT wins, then that's the first team this season to win multiple major champions, and they would probably have like close to a 20 match win streak unless they get upset in the winners bracket. But either way, they would be on a pretty incredible run. And if someone else wins it, it might be even more interesting, because it's been pretty much like a 2-team race, it seems, for the past month or so. So a lot to talk about, and I look forward to it. I think that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Shout out Rickus Morty, Jay Hearn, King Eagle, Waleed Mohammed. Who else? We had someone earlier too who was shouting us very early, and I lost them. It was Richard something.
Richard Nicole.
Yeah. So shout out everybody stopping by in the YouTube chat. Really do appreciate it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this weekend. It's my birthday on Friday, so I can't think of any other way I'd rather spend my weekend birthday than waking up early and watching Call of Duty. I still don't know if I'm actually going to wake up early, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this weekend. I think it should be a lot of fun stuff, and then we'll be back here on Sunday to break it all down. So hope you guys enjoy. Thank you as always, and remember to send the chow.